Greetings. This is Professor Hayes, and we'll be talking about Reconstruction in today's lecture. Be sure to access the PowerPoints that are on Blackboard so you can follow along with the lecture. And you also may want to just go ahead and have your study guide by you as well, so you can follow along, and you can go ahead and knock that out at the front end as opposed to the back end. All right. So So in our last lecture, we completed our section on the Civil War ending in 1865, shortly followed by the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. Okay. So a couple of things to keep in mind when thinking about Reconstruction. We know that slavery lasted for 246 years. So from 1619, where the first enslaved Africans who came to the land that would eventually become the United States landed in Virginia in 1619. In 1865, we have the United States officially abolishing slavery, so for 246 years. So for some kind of context, 246 years is longer than the United States has been in existence. So hopefully that will put the time length in some kind of context. So one of the things that we may want to consider is that Africans have been enslaved in this country for 246 years. So after that 246 years, some of the things that they may have wanted out of freedom. What would freedom look like? What would it mean to them? So before I start spouting out some ideas that I may have about freedom, I want you to just brainstorm, imagine, and consider what you think that that these newly freed men and women may want out of freedom. Okay, so with that in mind, you can go ahead and move to the next slide on the PowerPoint, because it demonstrates what we know that they wanted out of freedom. And what you may have imagined may not be on here, but chances are their vision and their image of freedom was so vast, it probably encompassed some of those things that you considered as well. All right, the paramount thing that newly freed men and women wanted was they wanted to reconnect with family. We know as a result of the internal slave trade, especially picking up in the latter 1800s, the latter 1700s, the early 1800s, you had families being broken away. So after freedom was achieved, now you have these millions of Africans who are trying to reconnect with family members. So up until the late 1800s to the early 1900s, as is seen in the primary source on the PowerPoint, you would have men and women who would take out classified ads in black newspapers where they would say, "Have you seen my wife? Have you seen my brother? Have you seen my sister? He has this physical feature. She has this physical feature. He is related to such and such, and I am at this location. Please let me know if you have seen him or her," which demonstrates that even through the brutality of slavery, it did not destroy the sense of family, which persisted long after the ending of that brutal institution. Along with family, as is shown on the PowerPoint, newly freed men and women wanted autonomy. They wanted freedom to be real. They wanted control over their own affairs. So some of it would be tangible, like land. We'll talk about land. Other it would be less tangible. So one of the less tangible ways that Africans or newly freed men and women demonstrated their autonomy was that they began to create new names. Not all, but some began to rename themselves. And because we know during slavery that is one of the basic things that Africans were not able to do. They were not able to name themselves. So their names could range. But one of the ways that newly freed men and women renamed themselves was that they named themselves in ways that reflected their new status. So there would be individuals who would name themselves Freemen, or they would change their last name to Liberty. Again, their last name reflects the importance of their new status. In terms of autonomy, another way or more tangible way that they demonstrated their new status was that they began to worship in the way that they saw fit. So we know that we have the explosion of black Christianity during the antebellum period, but even though you have this explosion of black Christianity, not in all cases were enslaved men and women able to practice their religions in ways that they saw fit. Many times it was under the gaze of slaveholders. So after freedom was achieved, you have this explosion, even greater than was the case in the antebellum era, of new people becoming Christians, new people joining churches. And one of the reasons why they're doing so is now that they can practice their religion in ways that they see fit, and it's not being done under the gaze of someone who is also controlling you through slavery. Education is also a key way that newly freed men and women demonstrated and lived out their freedom. They saw freedom and education as being, twin objectives. That the denial of education or the inability to be educated was in many ways akin to slavery. And so it had that symbolic reason, but also if you're not educated, there are very few ways that you can advance and make freedom real. Okay? Land was also key. Many newly freed men and many newly freed women believed that if you did not have control of your own land, you could be forced into conditions that were far too reminiscent of slavery. But if you were able to attain and secure your own land, you would have that autonomy that they greatly desired. You can move to the next slide. And this is one of the things that we'll be talking about in this lecture series. This period of Reconstruction lasted from 1865 to 1877. 1865 because we know that the Civil War ended in 1865. We'll talk about why the Reconstruction period ended in 1877. But there are two major questions that the country will grapple with during this 12-year time period. One of the things is what will be the status of newly freed men and women? We pretty much know the answer now, but if you take yourself back to 1865, we really didn't know that answer. We didn't know if they would gain land. We didn't know if they would be able to gain equality. We didn't know if they would have access to education. So these questions are, so the country and newly freed men and women are still grappling with these questions. Another major question that will have to be answered is how and if the Confederate States will be readmitted to the Union. We know that the Confederate States seceded from the Union, that they waged war against the Union. So how would they be readmitted, or would they be readmitted? And on the surface, these may seem like these are two separate questions, but actually the way that these newly freed men, the way that these Confederate States would be readmitted to the Union, and the status of these newly freed men and women, actually they would impact one another. So how and when a former Confederate state would be readmitted to the Union would have a great impact on the ability of a newly freed man or a newly freed woman to achieve freedom as they saw it. So this is what we'll be talking about in this lecture series.